Hey everyone, my name is Arturs, and in this video I would like to present a little crash course of IntelliJ IDE. I've been using it for more than 10 years, and I've accumulated a bunch of hotkeys, tips and tricks that you can use in your work. The information in the video is loosely grouped, it's mostly just stream of thought, so bear with me. And without further ado, let's get right into it. First, let's look at the group of commands that we will be using to access everything else in this video. You can use find action, accessible through Ctrl+Shift+A or Command-Shift+A, to see all the settings and all the other commands that you can access in IDEA. If you don't know a hotkey and you want to find how to do something, you can always open this dialog and find the command here. We can open the settings by pressing Ctrl+Alt+S or Command-Comma on Mac to go to the settings, and we will be going here often, so that's a fast way to get there. You can open project structure through Ctrl+Alt+Shift+S or Command semicolon to see the project settings, where you can define new modules, add new SDKs, and configure things related specifically to the project. You might see me doing a presentation here, and if I was doing this on a big screen, it might be more helpful if you could see the text better if you were sitting in an auditorium, but in this case I want to demonstrate how to use IntelliJ on a regular basis as a normal user. But if you ever need to present, you can go into the presentation mode, and I'm back in the find action. Enter presentation mode will make the font bigger, depending on the settings might disable the notifications, and will allow you to show your screen in a way that's easier to read. Now, you can do the same by going to this menu, pressing View, Appearance, Enter Presentation Mode. As you can see, every time I do something, you can see the hotkeys on the screen. That is because I've enabled Presentation Assistant that you can go and see in the settings, in Appearance, Presentation Assistant. It's a built-in feature that you can enable, disable, decide which hotkeys you want to show. If you ever want to present something like this video or any other learning material where you want to show not only what you're doing but how you're doing that, it's very convenient to use this setting, so consider that for your next presentation. If you want to start learning hotkeys and you don't know where to begin, the simplest way is to go to Help and Keyboard Shortcuts PDF. This will open a PDF that you can print and put next to your computer. This has most of the hotkeys we'll be discussing today and even more. This is how I learned in the beginning, and this is what I would recommend. If you started using the PDF and you can't always notice when you are doing something with your mouse when you could be using a hotkey, or maybe you need a bit of motivation or help when you're using hotkeys, one thing I would recommend is going and installing a plugin called Key Promoter. It's called Key Promoter X because the original version was Key Promoter and it was discontinued, so now it's Key Promoter X. This plugin will appear here, and first of all you can see the list of all the hotkeys that I've missed. So every time I could have used a hotkey, it records it, and it gives you a notification every time you're not using a hotkey. So let me clear the notifications right now. So if I open the project, you see that it says there's a hotkey Alt1. If I click on it, you will see a notification saying, hey, I didn't press Alt1, I clicked it, and it says I've missed it 163 times. So if I do it again, it will say again. And not only will it always give you a notification about missed hotkey, it will also give you a notification about a potential hotkey. So you see, notification doesn't have a hotkey right now, but I've been opening it often enough. And so if I click enough times, it will suggest to create a hotkey for an action I've been using often, but I don't have a hotkey for. This is very useful to streamline your access to the things you use often, and you yourself might not notice that, but Key Promoter will, and will remind you. On top of Key Promoter, there is another plugin that is bundled with IntelliJ called IDE Features Trainer. IDE Features Trainer is a plugin that you can enable or disable. Typically it's disabled by default, and then if you enable it, you will see a menu on the left that allows you to learn. It has some lessons. It will cover about a quarter of what we'll be discussing today. So if you want to start somewhere, this is also a good place to start. It gives you interactive demos and interactive trainings where you can use hotkeys and achieve some result that is tracked here. As you might have noticed, now we have tabs at the top. By default, when you open IntelliJ, you have all the tabs in one row, and then the tabs that don't fit appear in this drop down on the side. I find that very inconvenient, and the first thing I would suggest is that you go into the settings to the editor tabs and enable multiple rows. At least this way you will see all the tabs you're working with and you won't have to go to this menu. But you can go one step further and disable tabs completely. This way you will always be working on one file and that will be your main focus. It declutters the screen in my opinion and makes it much easier to navigate your code. Now that we have only one tab, you might have a question, how do I operate on multiple files? Surely when I'm writing code I need to go to different files. And the next set of hotkeys will help you do exactly that. If we're in one tab and you would like to go to one of the previous places you've been to, Ctrl+E or Command-E on Mac allows you to see your recent files. This way you can always go to the previous places and open them in this one singular screen you have in front of you. Another thing you can do is press Ctrl+Shift+E or Command+Shift+E on Mac to open your recent locations, which is basically the same thing. It shows you the files you've edited recently, but it also shows you the code that you've touched and how long ago did that happen. If you're completely lost and you don't know where to start, you can always double press Shift on any operating system and it will open Search Everywhere. Search Everywhere has a bunch of tabs, but in the main screen it shows you searches through all the different places it could be looking through, except this is not text search, it looks through some logical things, such as if you would press Ctrl+N or Command+O on Mac, it would be the same screen, but it would be the second tab where we're searching through classes. If you press Ctrl+Shift+N or Command+Shift+O, it will show you the searching through files. If you press Ctrl+Alt+Shift+N, it will be searched through symbols, which is Command-Option-O on Mac, and the interface we've already seen, Ctrl+Shift+A, and then all the double shift one is basically the combination of all of these options. You might have noticed that when I was showing Search Everywhere, I didn't talk about the Request Mapping tab. Request Mapping is a tab added by a plugin called RestfulHelper, which scans the typical REST annotations in Java code and then allows you to search through them. I'm using Spring Pet Clinic as an example here. If I press the hotkey I've defined, Ctrl+Shift+, which is not a default hotkey, then Request Mapping will open its interface and then I can type pets, and it will show me all paths that include pets in them. And then if I click on it or I press enter, I can go to the place where the controller is defined and then I can work on this code. If you press Ctrl+G, that will show you the interface to put in the line and column that you want to go to. Currently, since I've pressed it, it shows the coordinates for where I am right now. But if, for example, I wanted to go to line 120, I could type it in and go there. Another way to do this, let's say we're searching for this class, which is pet controller. I will be typing that, pet controller. And then let's say I want to go to line 30. If I type this with a column and 30, I will go to the line 30 of that class. Currently, I'm looking at the pet controller class, but if I'm writing some production code, typically not only do I want to look at the implementation, but I would also like to go and look at the test class of this controller. To do that, I can press Ctrl+Shift+T or Command+Shift+T for Mac, and that will give me the pop-up to find the tests. Here we see pet controllers tests, and when I press enter, I'm at the test. The same thing works backwards, so if I press Ctrl+Shift+T, I can see the classes this test is testing, and I can go to one of them. Let's go to a class that has a bit more hierarchy to it, such as pet types. You can see that pet type extends named entity, and there is a hotkey to go to the parent class of pet type. Ctrl+U or Command+U goes to the superclass or interface, in this case named entity, and on the other hand, if I want to go to the implementation, that will be Ctrl+Alt+B or Command-Option+B, which allows me to see all implementations of this class and go to them. Now that we've moved through a couple classes, it might be convenient to go back to where we were before. There are a couple ways to do that. One of them is pressing Ctrl+Alt+Left or Command+Left square bracket, which will go back to the previous place we've been to. And it also works the other way. Ctrl+Alt+Right goes forward, and that is Command+Right square bracket. This way we can navigate forward and backwards through all the places that we've had our cursor in, and sometimes that is enough and you would be able to get back to where you were. But even more robust way to get back is to go back to the last edit location, which works through Ctrl+Shift+Backspace or Command+Shift+Backspace on Mac. This way you can go back to the last place you've written code in. Now let's talk about building and running our code. If I just press Ctrl F9 or Command F9, that will build the code we have. For example, if I delete some code and I want to know if I broke some test or I broke some code along the way, again I can press Ctrl F9 and I can see all my build errors here. Once my code is built and it's working, I have run configuration and it's selected in this drop-down, I can run this code by pressing Shift F10 or Ctrl+R on Mac. Once the code is running, I can stop it from running by pressing Ctrl F2 or Command F2 on Mac. Typically, when I want to run the code, I don't just want to run it, I would also like to debug it. In this case, instead of pressing Shift F10, I would press Shift F9 to debug the same code selected in this drop-down. It's Ctrl+D on Mac and again Ctrl F2 to stop execution. Now that we've talked about running things that are already in this drop-down, how do we get things to this drop-down? Let's go to the test of this controller to see how it works. If I want to run this specific test, I can put my cursor on it and press Ctrl+Shift+F10. This will run the thing under my cursor. In this case, it's this test. If I put my cursor between two tests and press the same Ctrl+Shift+F10 or Ctrl+Shift+R for Mac, then I will run the whole test class. Accessible through Ctrl-Tick or Ctrl-Tick on Mac is Quick Switch Scheme, which allows you to switch things such as the theme and the keymap, which might be useful during pair programming and they have a keymap that you're not familiar with, but I rarely use it. A hotkey I've defined custom for myself, but I would also recommend defining is a hotkey for Manage Projects. I have it on Ctrl+Shift, but you can choose any hotkey you want. It shows you all your recent projects, and if you work with multiple projects, selecting a different project and opening it quickly is very convenient. Often in my work, I have two things that are similar. I would like to make a diff out of them or compare them. If I select two files and press Ctrl+D or Command-D on Mac, it will show me the comparison between these two files. And if I want to compare just these three lines that start with Spring Data Source, for example, then I can go to this file, copy these lines, go to this file, select these three lines, and press Compare with Clipboard. This way it will compare the selection in one file and what's in my clipboard. I can even edit this and this will edit my clipboard, or edit this and this will edit what do I have in the file. You can see that so far we've opened quite some panels and maybe even notification panel or something else. If I just want to look at my code, I don't want to be distracted by all this fluff. I can always press Ctrl+Shift+F12 or Command+Shift+F12 on Mac to hide all panels. I can always undo that by pressing them again. Sometimes in my work I need to edit some text or try out some code without changing the files. For this purpose I would like some disposable file that I can create and then forget about. Scratch is exactly that type of file. By pressing Ctrl+Shift+Alt+Insert I can create a new Scratch file. It is Command+Shift+N on Mac, and then if I open it I can see a new plain text file. I can freely edit this file, I can do whatever I want with this file, and then I can go back and never look at it. But if for some reason I need to find what happened in my previous scratches, I can always go to the project, down at the scratches and consoles, I can find it in the scratches folder. Now that we have only one tab, it's really hard to work on multiple files at the same time, especially looking at one file and editing the other. One way to address that is to go to the project, select the file you would like to open next to the one you're looking at, press Shift F4 to open it in a new window. I have a tiling manager and that's why it looks like this, but in your case it would just be a window. Another way to work on two files at the same time is to look at the menu, something like recent files, select the file you want and press Shift Enter. What you will see when you press Shift Enter is something like this, which will split the file on the second pane. But in my case, if I press Shift Enter, it will open a new window because I've rebound the key. Once we are in the split situation and we want to get back, it's really hard to figure out how to disable it. You need the unsplit command, which once you execute it, will get back to one screen. Now, let's look at some basic code editing commands. If you click on a line and press Ctrl/, it will comment the line. And if you want to undo that, you can click on the line and press Ctrl/ again, which is Command/ on Mac. If you want to comment multiple lines in a block comment, you can use Ctrl+Shift/ or Command-Option/ on Mac. Again, you can undo it by pressing the same combination. If you have a certain line of code and you would like to duplicate it, you can press Ctrl+D or Command-D to duplicate the line. Often when I need to reorganize code, I need to move a line up or down. I can do that by pressing Ctrl+Shift+Up or Ctrl+Shift+Down, Command-Shift+Up, Command-Shift+Down on Mac. This moves the line along its neighboring lines, but it also works for code blocks. If I try the same hotkey on a method, it will move it around other methods. You have to keep in mind that things such as annotations cannot be reordered this way because they are attached to the class, and if I try to move them, it moves the whole class definition and not just the two annotations in between themselves. If I want to select this whole if condition, I can do it by moving my mouse just like I showed you now, or I can do it by clicking anywhere in this line and pressing Ctrl+W to extend selection. This will slowly expand how much I select. It will be option up on Mac, and then if for some reason I've selected too much, I can always press Ctrl+Shift+W to shrink selection, or option down on Mac. It is especially useful if you're not sure how big is the block you want to select. I know that everything that is in this method I want to select, I can put my cursor somewhere where I know it's somewhere inside the method I want to select. Pressing Ctrl+W will select all of it. One way this can be adjusted is if we go to settings and we look for camel humps. There is a setting allowing you to use camel humps words. What it will do is instead of selecting the whole text, it will work on the camel humps that are defined here. So for example, if I click here, I don't select the whole method. I only select the part delimited by the camel hump. This works on most camel case or otherwise defined text. If I'm working on some code and I found the closing curly brace, but I don't know where the opening one is, I can always press Ctrl left square bracket or Command Option left square bracket, and that will go to the beginning of the block. The same way works for the end block. And if I add shift to it, I can select the whole block by pressing Ctrl Shift opening square bracket, or the vice versa, the closing square bracket. Something you often have to do, make some text uppercase, that will be Ctrl+Shift+U, and Ctrl+Shift+U again to toggle the case back. There is a convenient plugin that makes this even better, which is called String Manipulation. String Manipulation allows you to do many more things besides just uppercase or lowercase. String manipulation has many features. One of them is a rolling switch case, which rotates through all of these cases. Let's look at this text. It has both camel humps and the dots, but if I use the hotkey I've defined for switch case, which for me is Alt+Shift+U, which is not defined by default, then I can rotate through all of these cases, and I can transform a variable into a constant or anything else. For example, we can select this text and make its case useful for a variable. String manipulation has other features that aren't accessible through a hotkey unless you define one, but if you go to Actions and String Manipulation, you can see it can increment, decrement numbers, sort, filter, and edit lists of text however you want. If you want to join multiple lines together, you don't have to press backspace multiple times. You can just select the text and press Ctrl+Shift+J. This join works intelligently, so if we look at this string, we see that there are spaces between words. If we break the string, we can see that the spaces are retained here. And if I want to join the string back together, I can press Ctrl+Shift+J, and you will see that it will join the string, but also retain the spaces. And if we go to an empty text file, and this is how I most often use this feature, if I paste some text or type in some text, and then I want to join these lines into one string, I can press the hotkey, and then it will not only join the lines, but it will put spaces in between the words. If we edit our code and we clearly see that something is wrong and maybe indentation is wrong, you can always press Ctrl+Alt+L or Command-Option-L to reformat the code. If for some reason the formatting is still bad, you can use the join and then reformat code to get something more likable. The same way as we can format code, we can optimize imports. Let's add a new usage of stream, which has added one new import. And then as we delete it and go look at the imports, we see we have unused import. If I press Ctrl+Alt+O or Ctrl+Option+O on Mac, then the imports will be optimized. And you can also notice that because my formatting settings are different from the owners of this project, now the imports are reordered too. When we work with some code, especially if those are external libraries, we want to go and look at the documentation of that code. But we don't have to leave the file we're in. We can also press Ctrl+Q or F1 on Mac to open the documentation in a pop-up. Similarly, if we have a variable, for example owner here, and we don't know where it was defined, of course we can see here that it was defined in this method header, but let's imagine we can't see that. We can always press Ctrl+Shift+I or Option space on Mac, and it will show where was this variable defined. This works on most things you can imagine. If we look at this method, we see that it has two arguments, and the second one is called ignore new, but we have no idea what's the first one. We can press Ctrl+P or Command+P on Mac to show us the arguments of the method. And if we go over the comma, we can see that it highlights the right argument we're looking at right now. If we look at this line, we can see that owner has the getPet method, but what other methods does it have? If we go in, this class is readable, but the class could be much bigger. Instead, what we could do, instead of scrolling through the class, we could press Ctrl F12 or Command F12 for Mac, and we would see a list of all members. If we press the button again, we would see all the inherited members. Let's look at how is the equals defined for this class. We would go back to the object because that was the inherited method. Again, looking at this line, I see that owner has getPet method, but I would like to know who else is calling this method. By pressing Alt F7, I can open the Find Usages dialog where I can see everyone using this method, and if I click on a line, I can see the preview right here. Now a bit of visual organization, which I rarely use, but sometimes I work with a huge JSON and then it's helpful. So let's say we look at this if, and for some reason we don't want to get distracted by what's inside of it. We can press Ctrl- or Command- on Mac and it will collapse this if, and if I press Ctrl+, it will expand it again. I can do this on a bigger scale too. If I press Ctrl+Shift- to collapse all or Command-Shift- for Mac, and then if I press Ctrl+Shift+, that will expand all, Command-Shift+ for Mac. You can see that when it says collapse all, it does really collapse all, because opening one block does not open the blocks inside of it. To get back to the state you were in, you would have to expand everything. Next, let's talk about working with multiple carets. Let's open an empty JSON file and paste something in. One way to create multiple cursors is to press Alt-Shift and then click. And then in every place where you click, it will create a cursor that you can then operate with your keyboard. Another way to do that is to double tap Ctrl, or on Mac double tap Option, and then on the second tap don't release the key. So I will double tap Ctrl, and on the second tap I keep it pressed and I press down, which will create multiple carets below the original one. Another way to put multiple carets is to select some text that you would like to put a caret at, and then as you press Alt-J or Ctrl+G on Mac, every time you press it, it will put the cursor at the next occurrence. If you've selected too many rows, you can always press Alt-Shift+J to undo and go back one level. It's Ctrl+Shift+G on Mac. Instead of pressing Alt-J multiple times, you can press Ctrl+Alt+Shift+J to select all such occurrences, or Command Ctrl+G on Mac. Now let's imagine this JSON has much more text in here, and I want to put a cursor in every line. I could do it the way I do it normally, by pressing Ctrl twice and then pressing down. But if there are a lot of lines, it gets a bit tedious. What I could do instead is I could select all of this text and then press Alt-Shift-G or Option-Shift-G on Mac, and that will put a cursor at the end of every line. Now let's go back to the code to try some refactorings. Let's imagine I need to surround this if in a try-catch block. I could do it manually. I could also select this text and press surround here, or I could put my cursor inside of it and press Ctrl+Alt+T or Command-Option-T on Mac to surround it with some block I want. There is a whole collection of hotkeys to extract things. For example, this string, if I want to extract it as a constant, I would press Ctrl+Alt+C or Command-Option-C on Mac, and that would extract it as a constant. Another thing you might need is to extract something as a method. For example, here we want to take this line and put it in a separate method. By pressing Ctrl+Alt+M, I can extract it as a separate method, or Command-Option-M on Mac. The next thing we might want to extract is a parameter. For example, here we say local date now, but maybe we would like to pass it as an argument to this method. I can press Ctrl+Alt+P or Command-Option-P to extract it and make an argument out of it. Extracting parameters can be very convenient. Let's say we extract this line as a method. Here we can see, even though we pass the whole pet to this method, we only want this method to be called. So actually, to make this method really efficient, we should pass only the birth date inside. So if I want to extract this field as a parameter, you can see that now birth date is passed, and since we don't use the pet inside anymore, it will automatically remove that argument. So now you can see that not only do we have only one argument here, the original argument is adapted to extract out of the pet the birth date to pass into this method. And last but not least, extracting to a variable. This constant, let's say we want to do something with it before we return it. We can press Ctrl+Alt+V or Command-Option-V, and that will split it into a variable. Now let's say we split this method again and we see that, well, actually it was a bad idea and we would rather inline this back. We can do that by pressing Ctrl+Alt+N to inline, and it will suggest whether you want to inline all usages, whether you want to remove the method or not. We press refactor and now it's back how it was before. To write code fast, you might want to generate stuff. Let's say we want to generate a toString for this controller. It doesn't make much sense, but bear with me. We go select toString, add the arguments we want, and voila, we get toString generated for us. This works really well with tests too. Especially if you have defined some template for your tests, then you can quickly create test methods with the template you've defined. Another way to generate things is to use live templates. Let's go to this method and press Ctrl+J to show me the live template menu. It's Command-J on Mac. I type in south and it allows me to put in systemout.println. It's actually simpler than that because I can just type south and it will automatically suggest that all the live templates are there. There are other useful live templates such as to-do, which inserts to-do, and for I, which inserts a loop with all the arguments pre-filled for you. Live templates also support some tokens such as the current date or where to put your cursor. And on top of that, you can define your own live templates. They allow you to streamline your work and simplify generating boilerplate. Next, we can rename things. By pressing Shift F6, we can rename variables with all of their usages, as well as method names, class names, and anything else you can rename. There is a bit more advanced rename called change signature. If I click on this method and press Ctrl F6 or Command F6 for Mac, I can see all the arguments of this method, its name, return type and such. I can remove some argument or introduce a new one. And if I introduce a new argument, it will have a new default value that will be automatically used everywhere this method is used. And then if I press refactor, it will show me the issues I might be creating, but I could still refactor and it would update everywhere this method is used. Most of the refactorings in IntelliJ nowadays can be done with one simple trick. After any field or any method or most anything, you can put in the dot, and in this case it shows me the methods of the string. But if I press it again, it shows me different options for refactoring, such as rename, and it shows us the hotkey that we checked before. This works not only for strings, but also for things like methods. If I put a dot here, which doesn't make semantically sense in Java, I can still do things with this code. Let's look at some simple tricks in working with databases. So if I open the database menu here, I can see a connection to a local Postgres. If I press F4 or Command down on Mac, I will open the console for this database. Here I can see some SQL queries that I can execute by putting my cursor in them, pressing Ctrl Enter or Command Enter for Mac. You might notice that when I execute the queries, they are open in new tabs. By default, that's disabled, but I strongly suggest you enable it by going into Settings, Tools, Database, Query Execution, and you check Open Results in a new tab. There are a couple useful live templates for databases too. If I type in cell and press enter, it will fill in select star from, and then I can choose a table immediately and select from it. There is a similar command for inserting, which allows me to select the table, the columns, and then fill in the values. The last trick is indispensable if you're working in a corporate environment that has a database with a lot of tables and foreign keys and their relationships are unclear to you. You can right click on the database, go to diagrams and show diagram. It has a hotkey, but I never bothered to learn it. If we click on this, you will see that it shows me the diagram of all the tables that are present in the database. If it's a big database, it wouldn't be that helpful, so let's delete it and start pulling the tables one by one. You can see that as I'm pulling the tables, the relationships are added automatically. And so this is a good way to learn the relationships between tables visually, because it creates an ER diagram on the fly. Let's go back to our code to do some changes. Let's say we want to delete this part of it. As you can see, something has changed and Git tracks this change. If I press Ctrl K or Command K on Mac, I can see my commit, I can look at what was changed, I can select or deselect the changes, and then by typing in some comment, I can commit it. Now that I've committed the code, I can press Ctrl+Shift+K or Command+Shift+K on Mac to push this to the remote. If there are some changes that have happened on the remote and I would like to get them, I can press Ctrl+T and that will pull the data from the remote. If I want to get the data from the remote but I don't want to merge it into my branch just yet, I can use fetch, and in this case I would have to type it in the actions menu and do fetch. If I want to switch a branch, I can use Ctrl+Shift+Tick. I'm not sure if there is a hotkey on Mac, but this allows you to quickly choose a branch and switch to it. If I have Git tracking my code or any other VCS, I can change some code and then I can see it being tracked here on the side. But if I want to go to the previous state, I could click here and press this undo button. But as you can see, it says Ctrl+Alt+Z. So I can select this code, press Ctrl+Alt+Z or Command Option Z, and it will roll back to the previous state. Well, that's it, folks. Thank you very much for watching. These are all the tips and tricks I've learned over the years of using IntelliJ. If you have any other ideas, something I've missed, please leave them in the comments below. Otherwise, thank you very much and have a great day.